What I'm about to tell you is so explosive that if even half of it is true, the entire XRP narrative collapses and rebuilds overnight, because there is a whisper circulating behind closed doors that XRP could vanish from exchanges without warning, not because it failed, but because it succeeded too early and certain power structures were not ready for it. Let that sink in for a second, because this is not YouTube hype. This is the kind of rumor that moves quietly through intelligence circles, regulatory back channels, and private boardrooms where retail investors are never invited. And yet today, you are. People are asking, how could XRP be delisted globally in one coordinated move? Why would liquidity suddenly dry up? Why would headlines scream chaos while insiders remain calm? And the answer allegedly ties back to Ripple's positioning at the exact intersection of government oversight, global settlement infrastructure, and a coming financial reset that nobody on mainstream media wants to explain. There are quiet claims that former intelligence and regulatory insiders have warned that XRP is not treated like a normal crypto behind the scenes, that it is monitored differently, categorized differently, and potentially reserved for a role that makes public speculation inconvenient. Think about that while you hear constant fear narratives pushed by the same outlets that never explain why Ripple executives keep appearing in rooms with central bankers, payment giants, and supranational institutions. Ask yourself why the same regulators who attack everything else seem to move in slow motion when it comes to XRP, even as the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission drama drags on, and why asset managers like BlackRock or global bodies like the International Monetary Fund keep surfacing in adjacent conversations about tokenized liquidity and cross-border settlement. Now here is where it gets uncomfortable, because there is a theory being whispered that XRP's biggest risk is not price collapse, but temporary disappearance, a strategic delisting event framed as protection, regulation, or compliance, while infrastructure is quietly locked into place. That would mean panic for the unprepared and generational positioning for those who understand the game. Before we go any further, if you want access to the information mainstream crypto influencers are too afraid to touch, make sure you subscribe right now, turn on notifications, and hit like, because this channel does not survive unless people who value unfiltered intelligence support it early. And what comes next will absolutely test your conviction. The question you need to hold in your mind is this: why would anyone need XRP out of the public eye even temporarily, unless its real use case was about to collide with sovereign-level finance in a way that makes today's price and today's availability look almost laughable? And why are former insiders allegedly warning that the window to understand this closes fast? This is where the story truly begins, and if you think this sounds insane, good, because the biggest financial shifts in history always did right before they happened. Respected viewers, now we move from whispers to data points that mainstream commentators conveniently ignore. Because once you line these up, the picture becomes deeply unsettling and incredibly bullish at the same time. Start with the undeniable fact that Ripple has spent the last decade not marketing to retail traders, but embedding itself directly into institutional plumbing, working with banks, payment corridors, and regulators in a way that looks nothing like a speculative startup and everything like a pre-approved infrastructure provider. You do not get invited into conversations with the Bank for International Settlements by accident. You do not appear in white papers referenced by the World Economic Forum unless your technology is already being modeled for large-scale deployment, and you absolutely do not survive years of regulatory pressure from the SEC, while weaker projects are wiped out unless there is something far more complex happening behind the curtain. Insiders have pointed out that XRP's design, fixed supply, transaction speed, and liquidity characteristics make it uniquely suited for a role in a future where legacy systems like Swift are no longer sufficient on their own. And that is where the delisting fear narrative flips on its head, because if XRP is being prepared as a settlement layer or liquidity bridge, temporary restriction could be a feature, not a bug. Ask yourself why large financial entities quietly test corridors using Ripple technology while public discourse is dominated by price memes and fear, and why regulatory uncertainty seems to freeze XRP in place rather than destroy it outright. This is the same pattern seen historically when assets are transitioning from speculative markets into controlled financial frameworks. where volatility and accessibility are managed before scale is introduced. There are even reports that certain compliance frameworks would require exchanges to pull assets temporarily during reclassification, something that would look like catastrophe to retail while institutions already know exactly when and how access returns. This is why name after name keeps surfacing around XRP conversations, from central banks experimenting with digital currencies to asset managers exploring tokenized funds, because XRP sits at the crossroads of all of it, and that makes it dangerous to misunderstand. The data does not scream failure, it whispers preparation, and preparation always looks boring or terrifying right before it changes everything. Respected viewers, this is where the catalyst emerges and where the fear campaign completely falls apart if you know how to read it, because every major wave of XRP panic has followed the same script. Sudden rumors of bans, sudden delisting scares, sudden anonymous sources claiming insiders know something terrible is coming, and yet every single time the network continues to operate flawlessly while Ripple keeps expanding quietly in jurisdictions that matter far more than crypto Twitter. The alleged trigger everyone is watching now is a convergence of regulation, tokenization, and liquidity stress, because global markets are creaking under the weight of outdated settlement systems. And when that pressure spikes, assets designed for instant settlement stop being optional and start becoming sensitive. This is where the so-called X intelligence angle keeps resurfacing, not because someone is leaking secrets on YouTube, but because people who understand how governments manage strategic infrastructure recognize the pattern: control first, rollout second, narrative last. Think about how quickly fear spreads the moment rumors of exchange delistings appear, and then ask why that fear is amplified so aggressively while no one explains the mechanics of regulatory reclassification, custody changes, or institutional onboarding requirements. If XRP were truly a threat to the system, it would have been erased years ago, yet instead it sits in limbo, criticized loudly but constrained gently. And that is not how failed assets are treated. This is also why references keep circling back to central banking and settlement reform, including discussions adjacent to the Federal Reserve and other monetary authorities exploring real-time settlement and tokenized liquidity, because once those systems mature, the narrative flips from "is XRP legal" to "why is XRP restricted?" FUD relies on the assumption that delisting equals death, but history shows that temporary restriction often precedes integration, especially when compliance, liquidity controls, and systemic risk are involved. The panic sellers see collapse, insiders see calibration, and that disconnect is where wealth transfers always occur. So when you hear XRP will vanish overnight, the more precise question is vanish from where and for whom, because disappearance from retail platforms does not mean disappearance from the financial system. It can mean the exact opposite. Respected viewers, now we arrive at the part that makes people deeply uncomfortable: the price justification and the warning that nobody wants to say out loud. Because if XRP is even partially integrated into institutional liquidity flows, today's price models become almost meaningless. People laugh at high valuations because they frame XRP like a tech stock or a meme coin, but insiders frame it like plumbing, and plumbing is not valued on hype. It is valued on how much value flows through it. If XRP is positioned as a bridge asset for cross-border settlement, tokenized securities, or real-time liquidity, then price is not driven by retail demand. It is driven by necessity, by throughput, and by balance sheet mechanics that make current market caps look microscopic. This is why names like Goldman Sachs and other major financial institutions keep appearing in broader tokenization discussions. Because once trillions begin to move on-chain, even small percentage allocations require massive unit values when supply is fixed. Here is the final warning that you need to hear clearly. If there is a coordinated delisting or restriction event, it will not come with a neat explanation or a countdown timer. It will come wrapped in fear, compliance language, and headlines designed to flush out weak conviction. And by the time clarity returns, access may not look the same as it does today. This is how asymmetric information works. This is how insiders protect positioning. And this is how retail is historically shaken out right before repricing surprising events. I am not telling you what to buy or sell. I am telling you that treating XRP like a normal crypto in an abnormal financial transition is how people miss once-in-a-lifetime setups. The real risk is not that XRP goes to zero. The real risk is waking up one day and realizing it moved into a different category entirely, and you were still debating yesterday's fear narrative.